Welcome into the New Orleans Pelicans Podcast, a podcast dedicated to everything you need to know about the squad. Hear from players, coaches, broadcasters, and those who cover the NBA on a daily basis.
Zion is a superstar in the making. The minute he's on the court, he's a man-child. He's a man amongst boys. You can see 90% of the league scared to take an offensive foul against him, and we know why. That's a big brother right there. He's lost weight. He looks in shape. I like what I'm seeing because if he's healthy, the New Orleans Pelicans could be in the conference final. If he's healthy, they can do it. With that brother, yes, they can.
The New Orleans Pelicans Podcast starts right now.
Welcome to the Pelicans Podcast. I am Joe Cardosi, joined by the lugubrious Jim Eichenhofer. Jim, you know, we've been through some ups and downs. You know, there's been some bright spots, but in some dark times. The Pelicans have been struggling a bit in preseason, but still some room for optimism. I know we're going to take the roller coaster ride today, but I guess we got to talk about it. Another Pels loss, but, you know, not the time to panic yet, but you hope for some turnaround soon.
Yeah, and speaking of struggling, it's been a while since I've had to struggle to look up the definition of a word that you used to describe me, and this is the case today as well. I will be on Google shortly after we record to find out what lugubrious means.
I promise it's appropriate.
Okay, excellent. But yeah, no, you're right. It's been a rough preseason if you're just looking at bottom line results. Obviously, they've lost 3 games, and I think more to the point, they've had stretches where they've really struggled, and it's been not good performance. The starting 5 has definitely had some stretches where, you know, I think Willie Green was pretty blunt about this on Saturday that he wasn't happy with the way things were going.
Yep.
And but I think
he wasn't calling them out; he was calling them up. By the way,
exactly. I thought Saturday the second. We'll get into more detail on the Atlanta game later in the show, but fortunately there were some positives. I'm sure there's people who watched the first 2.5, 3 quarters and said, I'm done. I'm not watching this game anymore. And if you did that, you missed the second string, the third unit, doing some positive stuff in the fourth quarter and rallying them back. I mean, we talk about from time to time how long NBA games are. Yeah. Atlanta was up 29 in the third quarter, so you're thinking, okay, there's no way that it's possible that they're going to get back in this game. And they actually did get to the point where they got a couple more stops and made a couple more shots. They maybe actually won the game. Yeah. I think they got it down to 4 or 5. I mean, obviously they lost by 5, so it was tight at the end. But yeah, that group of guys definitely did some good stuff in the fourth quarter.
Yeah, and again, it is the preseason. It's not the time to panic, and you are seeing a lot of wrinkles getting ironed out. You know, and as we said, Willie Green calling them up, not call them out.
Yeah, I mean, in this clip, he basically talks about how things were not going well. You know, midway through the third quarter, early in the third quarter on Saturday, had a little discussion with the starters, and then they played better, and then that carried over to the second unit and the third unit. So Willie just talks about, you know, kind of what his tone was, you know, 2.5 quarters into Saturday's game.
Yeah, you know, it started in kind of midway, you know, last, I'll say, 8-minute mark in the third quarter with our starters. Just challenged him a bit and just said, look, other teams right now are creating habits. They're playing with toughness. They're taking care of the ball. They're rebounding. They're driving the ball, getting to the basket, and we're walking. We're not talking defensively. And to their credit, they had a 4 or 5 minute span where they picked it up. And that momentum trickled into the rest of the team. And the second unit came in, and second and a half unit came in. And to their credit, Trey, Jordan, Kyra, Dyson, Kaiser Gates, Seabron, they all came in and they just played their hearts out. And they played the way we want to play.
That was one good thing you did see out of the Pelicans. And at a time when you saw a little bit of loafing, sort of some bad shot decision-making, some bad shots getting jacked up, seeing that second unit come in and stabilize things had to be a little heartening, I think, especially when that game seemed so out of hand when they were getting thrown in there. It could have seemed like, well, it's on fire anyway, throw the second unit in there. But they actually helped to stabilize things, showed a lot of effort, and I think it was good to see, Jim.
Definitely. And, you know, I wonder, based on some of what we just heard in the clip from Willie Green, watching some of these first couple preseason games, some of the teams specifically that they've played against, I think in some ways they have a little bit more to prove. Yeah. Orlando is kind of a team on the rise. Atlanta has a bunch of guys. They made some moves in the offseason so that now their roles are a little uncertain as far as a little bit of their starting lineup, but a lot of their backups.
Right.
And then Houston seemed like the hungriest team in the league when the Pelicans played them in Birmingham. Yeah. So I think some of it is you have to see the Pelicans kind of raise that level of intensity and motivation to what the other teams are putting on the floor. Right. I'm not really concerned that we won't see that when the regular season starts, but I do think some of the results we've seen so far, it does seem like some of these teams have been, these opponents have been a little bit more ready to play in preseason so far. But we've seen the second unit, the backups for the Pelicans, I think have brought that kind of approach to the court where, I mean, all these guys have something to prove and something to
it's
gain.
Basically E.J. Liddell's rookie year because he got a year taken off. You see Dyson Daniels looking fresh. And it just seems like there are a lot of guys who are going to be trying to elbow their way into consistent playing minutes, and this is the time to do it.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, I thought on Saturday, too, Jordan Hawkins – first 3 quarters, really nothing special, but then in the fourth quarter, he goes off.
Yeah.
He makes 4 3-pointers during the second half. I think actually just during the fourth quarter, ends up with 17 points, went 5 for 11 from 3-point range overall. Dyson Daniels had 9 points, 5 assists, 4 steals, 4 rebounds, just checking a lot of boxes, doing a lot of stuff overall. E.J. Liddell had 10 points, 3 assists. Kaiser Gates, which is another player that Willie Green mentioned, he's on a 2-way contract. He knocked down a couple 3-pointers. So, I mean, just across the board, Dereon Seabron, another guy who spent a lot of time in Birmingham last year, had 9 points in 17 minutes, also had 3 assists. So the second unit actually had a ton of assists. They had 20 of the team's 32 assists. So I think that kind of demonstrates a little bit of that when that group came onto the court, they were sharing the ball really well. Pelicans scored 36 points in the first half and then had 69 in the second half. So they almost doubled their production in the second half, which was a plus. But, yeah, we saw a lot of guys play some good minutes, which was very much welcomed after what we saw in the first half of not only that game, but the game on Thursday in Birmingham as well.
And good to see Jordan Hawkins coming on. It almost seemed like a quiet 17 points in 22 minutes because it was sort of a slow burn. It seemed like he was going to struggle again in the beginning, and then the consistency started coming on. It was good to see. Hopefully that boosts his confidence a little bit. And like I said, Dyson Daniels just being a floor general, he's just consistent. It's not like he does a lot of dazzling plays that are going to end up on SportsCenter right now, but it just looks like he settles everyone down around him when he's there.
Yeah, I think so. That's a good way to put it. He's definitely kind of a calming presence, and even though he's only been in the league for 1 year, I guess he's kind of the quote-unquote veteran of that group. He's the guy who's played the most minutes in real NBA games among those players that I listed and mentioned. Couple quick stats, too, from preseason overall through the 3 games. I know it's only preseason. It's only 3 games. It's a small sample size. Sure. But Dyson Daniels is shooting 42% on threes. Jordan Hawkins is shooting 39% on threes. So those are definitely good signs. The fact that, maybe they're going to get, some really good punch from those guys as far as when they're open, which they will be a lot open when they're out there with some of the big guns on this team, that they'll be able to knock down those shots.
And unfortunately, we got to talk about some of the big guns that are going to lose time. We talked about Naji's going to be out for a little bit, although it doesn't look as bad as it did initially. When you first saw him go down, I mean, I was initially thinking ACL or something, just the way it buckled.
Right.
And now it seems like that may be walked back a little bit. It seems like he's not as injured as maybe I might have been afraid of. And Trey Murphy, of course, he's going to be out for a chunk of the season, which we hate to see because it seemed like this was his time, to be on the scene and arrive. And we hate to see that postponed, but they will be back, it seems.
Yeah, and, we'll get into more detail as far as just the overall group of guys that we're waiting to see get back on the court. But Willie Green kind of talked about the status of Naji Marshall and Herb Jones after Saturday's game.
Naji had a hyperextended knee. Looks to be fine, but we'll get an MRI and see where he is. And Herb had basically a strained neck or sore neck, so once again, same thing. We'll just check on him from day to day.
So heartening news there, Jim. It's great to hear from Coach Willie Green. You know he's a straight shooter, so it seems like we may not be as in dire straits as we thought we were when we first saw that injury.
Yeah, the Pelicans released a medical update on Naji Marshall on Sunday afternoon. Not sure if everyone saw it. It was kind of right in the middle of the Saints game, but he's going to be reevaluated in 2 weeks. So hopefully, based on that timeline, he's only going to miss the very beginning of the regular season. Seems like based on that timetable that he definitely won't play in the game Memphis on October 25th, which is only 9 days from now.
Yeah.
And then the home opener against the Knicks is about 2 weeks from now. So we'll see where that goes. Didn't hear anything further on Herb Jones, so hopefully that was something where, if it was a regular season game that we would have seen him back on the court.
Yeah.
Or that he's going to be fine.
Just blows to the head. You don't want to, if it's a neck thing, a head thing. It seems like they just didn't want to risk throwing him back out there to take more damage. But it seems like he's okay for the most part.
Yeah, and you mentioned Trey Murphy. Nothing new on him. We still hope to see him back, and he mentioned on Media Day he hopes to be back in November. And then obviously the other two players, Jose Alvarado actually tweeted on Friday, quote, "I miss playing. It's almost time." So that would be a good sign to me that hopefully we'll see him back on the floor. Larry Nance Jr. has not tweeted lately about his physical status, but he did tweet about how he's about to announce a community project in New Orleans. So hopefully the news is good on him as well.
Fingers crossed.
Hopefully, this week we'll get to see maybe both of those guys hopefully will be able to get more on the practice court. But as we record this Monday morning, nothing officially new on either of those players, but I'm guessing that we'll hear more from Willie Green maybe as the week progresses as far as what their status is going to be.
Look, let's just hope that they can take a page out of whatever Aaron Rodgers is doing. I'm looking at the TV behind you. He's walking without crutches after tearing his ACL. His own coach is calling him a freakazoid. We need to get whatever hyperbolic chamber, whatever he's using, and get it into the Pelicans facility. I just hope for good health all around, and we want to see the team whole as we roll into the season. And we got the Orlando game on the morrow, my friend. And I guess the Pels got to get ready.
Yeah, this will be a rematch. They played the Magic here last week. I thought the first half of the game went pretty well against the Magic, but then Orlando really took over in the second half. Yeah. We don't know, again, as we record this Monday morning. I'm not sure what the plan is as far as how many minutes the starters are going to play. Right. Willie Green said before the first preseason game against Orlando that he wanted to kind of ramp up their minutes, and he has gradually increased their minutes each game in terms of how much they're going to play. So that'll be something that we'll also monitor, in the next day plus is, how much are we going to see them against the Magic. My matchup to watch for that game is going to be the Pelicans starters versus Orlando starters. Yep. Obviously, we heard earlier in the show that what Willie Green said about, kind of addressing that group and telling them what he wants to see from them. So that'll be something to watch during the game Tuesday. Orlando's starting group had a lot of encouraging moments. Wendell Carter Jr. played really well in the other preseason game. Franz Wagner played really well. So that'll be something to check out. And my player to watch is going to be E.J. Liddell. Yeah. He had 10 points in the game Saturday against Atlanta. And to me, that was the best he's looked so far in preseason as he comes back from being out all of what would have been his rookie season with a knee injury.
Yeah, so another guy that had some physicality, too. He looks noticeably bulked up. He was never a thin-framed guy, but he looks like Dyson. Looks like he's bulked up, and he looks ready to go, man.
Yeah, so I'm encouraged by the way he played and basically just looking to see him build on what he did Saturday. He was also 4 for 4 from the field and 2 for 2 from three-point range. So 10 points on 4 shots. I think we will take that every time.
Absolutely, yes. Efficiency is always welcome. And speaking of things that are always welcome, I see a fog, a bit of a haze, sort of emanating in the room. The lights are flickering. That can only mean one thing: a Jim rant, I guess.
Yes, it does, Joe.
Jim rant. All right, well, people, get on your helmets, get on your pads, get ready to run through a wall. Jim is ready to take us all on a journey with his rant.
You mentioned how there's some steam and there's some fog. You know, there was, but this is actually going to be a positive Jim rant. I know.
Oh, there's fairy dust.
Hey, everybody. It's time for a Jim rant. Jim rant. Jim rant. Alrighty, Will.
You don't see those very often, but this is going to be one. Basically, what I wanted to talk about today was just, so basically the NBA last week had kind of a press conference where they brought in some national media people, some important dignitaries from the media field.
Sure.
I was not invited somehow, but that's
How
okay.
can you say that if you weren't there?
Yeah,
they had
exactly.
some people there,
Right.
but you weren't, so
Right.
whatever.
And the purpose of this meeting was basically Joe Dumars from the NBA league office talked about how they want to reemphasize that this is an 82-game league. It's not a 60-game league. It's not a 40-game league.
Yep.
And basically, the gist of what his conversation was we've got to do something about getting players on the court more. I'm all behind this. I'm totally supportive of this. I think they've made some good decisions and some moves as far as, for example, you now have to play in 65 games to be eligible for the individual NBA awards.
Yeah.
There's a couple disclaimers with some of the rules that they've put in, but this is another good step. Now, is it going to rectify and solve every single instance that fans complain about or that I complain about in terms of star players not playing in games? No. It's not going to be something that fixes everything.
Yeah, nothing's going to be a panacea, but at least it's a step in the right direction. They're addressing something that both casual and locked-in fans have been talking about for a very long time.
And I think everyone can still agree that for some of the players who have long-term injuries or people that are coming off of off-season surgery, for example, Kawhi Leonard is somebody that people talk about all the time as an example of, can we please get this guy on the court more?
Yeah.
There are some stipulations where the league is saying, like if you have a specific situation where you're recovering from something, you can still sit out games here and there based on the circumstances. I don't think people overall have a problem with that. It's more of the just this guy played 3 games in a row and now he can't play a 4th game because it's 4 games in
he's tired.
7. It used to be 4 games in 5 nights was like the big thing. Now it's like, okay, he's played 3 games in 6 days, so he can't play that 7th day kind of thing. So, again, I like it. I do think, too, that one of the conclusions that Joe Dumars made and Adam Silver also made, has talked about repeatedly over probably the past year, is that the idea of load management and keeping some of the guys off the court based on scientific data, the goal of that was to reduce injuries and to
long-term injuries.
Right, and to also to kind of make sure that you want to be able to keep them on the court more ultimately.
Yeah.
Basically what's happened, though, is that there hasn't been any decrease in injuries. In fact, there may actually have been an increase in injuries. Plus, you have guys that are sitting out that are healthy.
Yep.
So I think from the league standpoint, the league is saying, what's the upside here?
Right. We gave an inch and you took a mile, and now we got to figure something out.
Right. There's no benefit because if the injuries are still the same or worse, and you're having more guys that are getting DMPs, even for instances where they always played in the past. So one of the things that the league's talked about that I think is really interesting is just the fact that they basically say that there's no data that backs up the idea that this has worked. So basically they're saying, if the way that things have been approached is not actually yielding a positive result, then why are we doing this?
Yeah.
So there's going to be a lot of push and pull, I'm sure, between the league and teams because teams have their own objectives and their own priorities.
Well, it's an interesting move too. Generally, once you give a right or an allowance to someone in a league, it's hard to take that back away because they have already figured out how to use it to their advantage, or they already have a mechanism for it. So once you give something, it's hard to take it back off the table. But once again, Adam Silver even bringing that up as a possibility shows how innovative the league is. That if you misuse this, we will take it back off the table.
And I also think too that there's a very important part of the message that you send to people that I feel like, I don't want to say has been completely ignored, but I do think that from a lot of teams' perspective, they don't think about this. I don't want to say they don't care, but it's definitely not a priority. To me, the message that you send by telling people this game isn't that important, therefore we're not going to play Luka Doncic or play some of the other guys that have been kind of gets periodic games off.
Right.
Even if they don't really have a full-fledged injury. It's more like we're just doing this because we want to rest
Knee
them.
soreness. Yeah.
Right.
Whatever.
The message that you send over time to fans is we don't even think this game is that important. So I don't understand how you're going to get to the point where you tell people we want you to spend a lot of money on stuff if you yourself are saying that it's not important to us.
Well, I mean, if you're one of those people who like brought your family out, drove an hour and a half, however long, far away you live from an arena, and then get there, spend a bunch of money to park, get some concessions, and then the team is basically telling you like, yeah, we don't care.
Right.
I mean, you feel like a rube. You feel like
Yeah.
you got fleeced for no reason. So of course it's something that needs to be addressed. It sounds like some old guy like back in my day talk, but it is a legitimate problem that a lot of fans have grievances about, feeling fleeced.
Right. I mean, one of the analogies I would use is that if you kind of put it in everyday terms, if you went to a grocery store and you always went there to buy bread or milk, and like 1/5 of the time the milk wasn't good and 1/5 of the time the bread was stale, would you go back to that grocery store? I definitely wouldn't. So, again, this isn't gonna. The efforts that no one thing that the league does to me is going to fix everything. But when you combine these different efforts, including the in-season tournament, to send the message that this part of the regular season is important and we want to stress that, I think that's super key and something that I want to see the league and teams continue to try to chip away at. This idea that either parts of the regular season or the regular season as a whole is not important. I mean, think about this too. Sacramento just made the playoffs last year. They hadn't made the playoffs since 2006.
Yeah.
They had a 17-year stretch where they were never in the playoffs. So if your mentality is the only thing that matters is the playoffs and not the regular season, that meant the Kings went 17 years of not playing any basketball that means anything. So, I mean, you can't operate that way. The regular season has to have some...
I mean, they're married. They're conjoined. One leads to the other. I mean, the effort and the work you put in the regular season generally carries over to the postseason. You can't just turn it on. Otherwise, everyone would. If there was just a flip to switch, you have to have that in your DNA leading into the postseason. And the only way to do that is regular minutes, gelling cohesively with a regular starting five, and hoping to get your guys on the court showing maximum effort when they're ready.
And I think I'm fine if people want to have the perspective or the emphasis of saying, okay, in terms of what I think is important, 50% of it is regular season, 50% of it is playoffs. But I feel like as time has gone on, we've kind of slowly adopted this mentality that it's like 10% is regular season, 90% is playoffs.
Yes.
And so I think that's a real problem when you consider that the regular season is, people complain that maybe the playoffs are too long, but either way, regular season is from October until April.
Yeah.
So you're talking parts of 7 months where there's regular season basketball. So you can never treat that as like, we'll just wait around until the playoffs and then we'll get invested.
You're missing most of basketball.
Right.
If you do that. I don't even know how you know what's going on unless you're just reading tweets from other people and regurgitating what you read. But it really is important in terms of those soft tissue injuries where you need to keep them warm. You can't just sit. You can't just let those things stagnate. Seeing these players actually like addressing injuries, seeing the league actually addressing these injuries in an interesting way, where both it deals with the player safety issue, but it also is addressing some fan concerns. I think it's a nice blend, a nice approach for them to take. I think Adam Silver's doing a lot of good stuff here.
And again, there's people out there that know infinitely more about this than I do in terms of the specifics of the player injuries, the specifics of the player rehab and recovery. But I do think that there's kind of a groundswell that's growing of people who have started to make the point too of, are we sure that the more we protect the players, the more that it's actually helping them avoid injuries? I think in some ways, the more you treat some of the players with kid gloves, the more you make them vulnerable and susceptible to injury. And the one thing that I heard someone say a few years ago that I thought was such a good analogy was, do you train for a marathon by not running? And I would say you can apply that to some extent to basketball, where it's like if you maintain guys, quote unquote, maintain guys all season, and then in the playoffs, it's like, okay, now we need you to play 40 of the most intense minutes that you've played all year.
And it's a nonstop sport. That's the thing about baseball, football. There's so much starting, stopping, waiting, in between plays. There's so much trading off. Basketball, you are constantly on the floor, moving on both sides of the ball. You have to be in physical shape. You have to be ready.
Yeah, so I think I do wonder, and again, there's people that know way more than I do about this, but I do wonder if some of the injuries. I think Adam Silver has mentioned this too, that not only have injuries not decreased, but they've actually probably gone up. I wonder how much of that is from that you maintain them and keep them under wraps for a long time, then all of a sudden, boom, they have to play more and more intense basketball.
Or are they listing injuries that are not actual injuries?
That's
that
part
are
of
being
it.
nursed
Yeah, I think
and
so.
having to sit the players, and that's part of the. There's just so many things that go into it. I think it's going to be interesting to see how players respond to this and see how happy it makes some of them. But I guess we're going to see this season.
And here's the one final point too I want to make: the players, I think, want to play basketball. So I don't think in a lot of cases. I don't think it's fair in many. There might be some exceptions, but in most instances, I think it's unfair for people to say like, these guys are making so much money and they don't want to play basketball. I think in a lot of cases, it's really the teams themselves that are keeping players off the court. So
yeah, most players have to be saved from themselves by more cool-headed figures in the organization.
And you don't get to this level as a player unless you wanted to play basketball. If they have to drag you out there, your NBA career is very short unless you're extraordinarily talented that you just can get by on that, which there's not many guys that fits the case.
Yeah.
So, I mean, most of the players that have made it to the NBA, they want to play basketball as much as possible. So, I don't want to turn this into either of me targeting the players and saying like, what a bunch of bums that don't want to play basketball. I think that they're totally cool with playing, but in a lot of cases they're being held off the court.
Yeah, absolutely. And it's just one of those things you have to sort of start some sort of movement to fix it. You have to start somewhere, and this is a place to start, and I think it's going to be interesting to see how it turns out. That actually was an interesting gym rant. It was a little happy. I don't feel as scared and trembly as I usually do after a gym rant. So yeah, I actually feel good.
Yeah, man. It was kind of it was more of an encouraging gym rant. It was more of a like, hey, I like what I'm seeing, and let's see more of this, as opposed to me trying to tear something down.
Jim coaching them up. Look at that. Jim always has the good Jimfo, and it looks like we are going to be rolling into another preseason game and not far away from the regular season, so you're going to start seeing those muscles exercised, and more Jim rants ahead, I can assure you. Big thanks to Mr. Jim Eichenhofer for hopping on the podcast with all the big info and all the great sound. Big thanks to you for listening to the Pelicans Podcast. We will talk to you once again on Wednesday. And until then, go Pels!
Thanks for listening to the New Orleans Pelicans Podcast. Join us 3 times per week on Pelicans.com, the Pelicans mobile app, or you can subscribe to the podcast on iTunes. We'll see you next time right here